As is custom, I'll make a statement, go through a few slides, and then happy to take some questions. Today's national accounts shows that the Australian economy remains remarkably resilient in the face of significant global and domestic economic headwinds. The Australian economy has grown by 1.7% through the year and by 0.4% for the quarter, in line with market expectations. While other major developed economies like Germany, the United Kingdom, South Korea and Singapore have experienced negative economic growth this year, the Australian economy is in its 29th consecutive year of economic growth, a record unmatched by any other developed nation. We have maintained our AAA credit rating and one of only 10 economies to do so from the 3 leading credit rating agencies. We've seen our current account return to surplus for the first time in more than 40 years. We've seen welfare dependency at its lowest level in 30 years. We've seen the biggest tax cuts in more than 20 years, and we've seen the first balanced budget in 11 years, and we'll be returning the budget to surplus for the first time in 12 years. The budget is back in black and back on track. And importantly, the labour market remains strong, with more than 1.4 million new jobs being created since we came to government, participation rates at around record levels, and the annual jobs growth is at 2%, more than double the OECD average and nearly 3 times of what we inherited when we came to government. In today's national account numbers, growth has been broad-based, with household consumption, public final demand and net exports all contributing to GDP growth. Household consumption increased by 0.1% in the September quarter to be 1.2% higher through the year. Expenditure increased in 9 out of 17 consumption categories. Household disposable income grew by 2.5%, the fastest quarterly rise in a decade, with the ABS saying it was driven by a decline in income tax payable and interest paid on dwellings, as well as continued rises in the compensation of employees. This has led to an increase in the household savings rate to 4.8% through the quarter. As at the end of November 2019, the ATO has issued more than 8.8 million individual tax refunds for the 2018-19 year, totalling around $25 billion, which is 30% higher than a year ago. Whether spent or saved, the tax cuts have helped put households in a stronger economic position, making them more financially secure with more money in their pocket, and this will support the economy. The economy continues to be supported by new public final demand, which includes spending across all levels of government, which rose by 1.5% in the quarter to be 4.9% higher through the year. Public final demand is being supported by the continued rollout of the National Disability Insurance Scheme, more money being spent on aged care, as well as the government's 10-year $100 billion infrastructure pipeline. Last month, the Prime Minister announced that the government will bring forward $3.8 billion of infrastructure spending to ensure that infrastructure continues to support the economy and create jobs. When you add the bringing forward of the infrastructure spending to the largest tax cuts in over 2 decades, along with more than $1 billion additional funding and drought relief, this amounts to $9.5 billion of additional support to the economy that we have provided since the election. Net exports contributed 0.2 percentage points to GDP growth in the September quarter, with strength in mining and services exports supported by a lower Australian dollar and strong demand for these exports, supported by the large number of free trade agreements that this government has entered into since coming to office. Through the year, services export growth has been above 6% for the past 5 quarters, particularly education-related exports. The drought continues to have a devastating impact on Australian communities, as well as hitting the bottom line of the Australian economy. We've seen farm GDP 5.9% lower through the year to the September quarter, and falling in 4 of the past 5 quarters. Rural exports fell by 2.8% in the quarter. And after several years of strong growth, dwelling investment has fallen for the past year and detracted 0.1 percentage points from growth in the September quarter. New business investment fell by 2% in the quarter to be 1.7% lower through the year. And this was principally driven by falls in mining investment, which fell by 7.8% in the quarter to be 11.2% lower through the year, largely reflecting LNG projects that were transitioning from investment to production. However, the outlook for the mining sector and mining investment is strengthening, with investment intentions from the Capital Expenditure Survey suggesting that mining investment will grow solidly in 2019-20. Non-mining business investment fell by 0.4% in the quarter. There was some strength in the construction of offices, hotels and warehouses in the quarter. Non-residential building construction increased by 3% in the quarter to be 4.2% higher through the year. Company profits increased by 1.7% in the quarter to be 11.1% higher compared to a year ago. Company profits were partly offset by a fall in mining profits of 2.3% in the quarter, but mining profits remained 23.1% higher through the year. Growth in compensation of employees, which measures the national wage and salary bill, was up 1.1% in the September quarter to be 5% higher through the year. Through the year, growth has been above 4% for the past 8 quarters, the strongest run of growth since 2012 and above the 10-year average of 4.6%. Average earnings, as measured in the national accounts, grew by 0.7% in the quarter to be 2.9% higher through the year compared to 2.6%, the 10-year average. Importantly, living standards, as measured by the ABS's preferred measure of real net national disposable income per capita, are 3.3% higher through the year compared to a long-run average of 1.5%. Productivity growth in the market sector was 0.1% lower in the quarter to be 0.2% lower through the year. This is why we are pursuing reforms and have pursued reforms across the tax, deregulation, infrastructure and skills agendas. In conclusion, Australia is not alone in facing significant domestic and global economic headwinds, but there are reasons to be positive about our economic future. Standard & Poor's said recently that the outlook for the Australian economy was sound. Deloitte said that the Australian economy is picking up with momentum. The IMF and the OECD are forecasting Australia to grow faster in 2020 than any G7 nation, and the Reserve Bank of Australia has said the economy has reached a gentle turning point. The numbers today underline the economic resilience of the Australian economy and the need to stay the course and stick to the plan as outlined in this year's budget. I'll now just quickly go through a few slides. So the first slide shows that we're seeing 1.7% through the year growth. The June quarter was revised upwards to 0.6%. Next slide. Nominal GDP continues to be a strong story. At 5.5%, it's above the 10-year average. Next slide. What we've seen is a pickup in 9 of the 17 consumption categories. Furnishings and household equipment is a positive story and may be related to the improvement we're starting to see in house prices and the stabilisation in the housing sector. Purchase of motor vehicles continues to be a challenging sector. Next slide. New public final demand, that's strong growth based on government investment in infrastructure as well as the full rollout of the NDIS, which is now covering hundreds of thousands of people, and will continue to be fully rolled out in the years ahead. Next slide. Farm GDP, well, this is a drought story, down 5.9%, and obviously that's a significant hit to the bottom line, but a more devastating impact on Australian families and communities that have been hit by the drought. Household savings ratio is picked up by 4.8%. This is clearly another story in the budget. People are getting more money in their pocket through the tax cut, but they're not spending it all. They're definitely saving, and that has increased. The government's goal has always been to put more money in the pockets of the Australian people, and it's their choice as to whether they spend or save it. Next slide. Compensation of employees. This is the wages and salary bill of the Australian economy. Again, a good story, 5% above the 10-year average. And finally, real GDP growth comparisons. As you can see, Australia is second only to the United States in through the year real GDP growth. What you need to look at in the context of the economic challenges that Australia faces is that we are not alike. And these challenges, be the trade tensions between the United States and China and the devastating drought at home, these domestic and global economic challenges are very real. They are being felt across the Australian economy, but the economy, as shown by the numbers today, is being remarkably resilient. Over to any questions.
At the time of the budget, you forecast 2.75% for this financial year. Is that still achievable?
Well, we'll update our forecasts in my EFO, but the story today is, despite the headwinds, domestic and international, we see the Australian economy continuing to grow, 1.7%. I see the Labor Party was out last night trying to inoculate themselves about an increase in economic growth. Well, today's numbers show there has been an increase in economic growth. But what we have seen is the labour market continues to be strong. We've seen a pickup in compensation of employees. We've seen a good story in terms of net exports and what is happening with our current account surplus. And of course, you know, we would like to see consumption to be higher. There's no doubt about that. But obviously people are getting more money in their pocket through the tax cuts.
Treasurer, you say it's the government's responsibility to give people more money. It's up to them whether they spend or save it. How does saving help the economy?
Well, at the end of the day, people are doing what we're doing at the federal level, which is paying down debt. And you've got now more than 70% of people with a mortgage being at least 1 month ahead of their interest payments. So people have decided to pay down their debt, and that is absolutely their right. But as the Secretary of Treasury said to this Parliament at a committee meeting, committee hearing, if people pay down their debt, then ultimately in the long run they will have lower interest payments, and that will free up more money to spend across the economy. So it does represent a bit of a timing issue, but ultimately our goal is for Australians to get more money in their pocket, and that's what we've done with the most significant tax cuts in more than 20 years, and it's up to the Australian people whether they choose to save or to spend.
Treasurer, business growth is still, business investment is still really anemic. Are you going to make them wait until the budget next year before you give them some extra help, or are you going to announce it in my EFO?
Well, as I've said previously, Renee, we're in discussions with the business sector about initiatives in that area. But what we've seen in terms of the business investment numbers is a bit of a story out of the mining sector in terms of the LNG investments coming to an end. And we've also seen in terms of farm investments obviously flowing on from the drought, and that's also been a factor. So in terms of business investment, we've continued to discuss with the business community about various initiatives, but of course there are some other factors behind these numbers.
The Reserve Bank has made clear it wants unemployment down below 4.5%. Can you see unemployment getting down to that level based on current policy settings?
Well, the employment numbers have been strong, and as I said, employment growth at 2% compared to an OECD average of 0.9% and 0.7% when we came to government, and that has helped get our participation rate up to near record levels. So we'll continue to have initiatives that drive more investment, that drive more employment. And as you know, Shane, the notion of what is full employment has actually changed from central bankers' views. Traditionally, they understood full employment to have a 5 in front of it. Now they understand it to have a 4.
Can you see it getting to 4.5?
Well, what I can see is more jobs being created within the Australian economy. Let's not forget that 34 of the last 36 months we've seen jobs creation, and we've seen very strong jobs growth in a number of sectors.
Treasurer, the economy and consumption in particular is still subpar and substandard. What can you point to that's going to be a catalyst to change that around in the next few months? What's going to change that?
Well, obviously, we've got major spending in infrastructure. We've got a major skills agenda. We've got industrial relations reforms, and we'll be bringing back that ensuring integrity bill. And of course, in terms of tax cuts, that continue to be rolled out, and they're the most significant in more than 20 years. I better go to a division, but the numbers commend themselves to you. Thank you.